Welcome to The Village Lantern, a podcast for families living with hidden challenges such as autism and other neurodiverse conditions, and for anyone else wanting to understand, love and support. Our mission is to build understanding, empathy and love for families living with one or more children who have hidden conditions that make life harder one way or another. We call this extra zing. And then Plan B is his whole kind of concept, which is a collaborative approach to problem solving. And it absolutely has to involve the child. So I think that number one is already really interesting, and it seems so obvious. So much of what he says seems so obvious, but you think, oh, why didn't, I haven't really thought about that.
Engage the child in decision-making and problem solving?
Yes. I don't want to hear because they're autistic or because they have ADHD, because that's not helpful. So I want to hear from the child, from their own mouth, about that situation. In the spirit of reconciliation, Takes a Village acknowledges the traditional custodians of country here on the lands of the Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri Woi-Wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, as well as throughout Australia, and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today.
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to talk to you about the topic today.
Oh my gosh, it's going to be really hard for me to organise my thoughts because there's so many of them.
But it's fresh, which is why we wanted to do it. So Anna has been on a 2-day course, workshop, something with the amazing Dr Ross Greene. So tell us who he is and how you came about it.
So I don't know who he is.
Yeah.
I mean, I do. I came across him quite a few years ago now when I'm always, at the beginning of something new, I'm like, read, find out more. And I found a book called The Explosive Child, which I think he wrote in the late 90s sort of thing. And it was really life-changing for me, the way that he talks about how to help our kids, because he comes from a perspective of, and I think because he's American, I think it's an intentional shift away from that ABA approach that is very big in America.
Yeah, which is?
Which is something about behaviour management.
Okay.
So it's specifically about, and it's very much used in autism, around how to manage behaviours.
Yeah.
So, for example, if a kid's hitting, what are the strategies you can put in place to stop them hitting?
Yeah.
But Ross Greene says, well, if they're hitting or any behaviours that might be considered concerning, they're actually trying to tell you something. They're not just hitting for no reason. So he's got this perspective of trying to uncover what that is, which just makes so much sense.
Totally.
So when I read that and I started to understand, and our psychologist used to talk about this as well, that if there are these behaviours, they're trying to achieve something. The child's trying to communicate something, either they don't like something. Yeah. And Ross Greene said yesterday,
they're overwhelmed or they're in distress.
Right. So he said it's like an infant. When a baby is small, they have needs and they communicate them, but they don't have words yet. And he said this relates to children who are non-speaking as well. They can still communicate. I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm uncomfortable, I'm scared, I'm sick, and we get to know and understand those cries. And he said, by observing, and the more you get to know that infant or that child, you can start to understand. And then as they get older and more complex, and if they're able to express themselves with words, and he did have some suggestions of how you could, if the child is non-speaking, to be able to start to unpack that. So for that example of a child might be hitting, when are they hitting? What's happening now? What's happened before? And if they don't hit all the time, then that tells you that they're only doing it circumstantially, and you want to try and unpack that. Now, there may be lots of reasons behind it, and then the other thing is really challenging your assumptions about what you think the reasons are. Oh, they're hitting because they're frustrated.
Yeah.
Well, they might be, but what else? So he's written quite a few books. Another one's called Raising Human Beings. I'm sure that's one of his as well. And now he's teaching. So he's got I think he's very successful, or at least he has a lot of reach, which I consider to be success. And he works in a lot of schools in the US, and he works with families. And I think one of the things he explained about in the US, they still use quite strong restrictive and punitive practices.
Yeah, I saw that on his website,
for severe behaviours. which he's obviously very concerned about. And
none of which we do. Well, certainly not in the Victorian school system.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
I think so. I mean, I think even if you think about in a juvenile detention centre, for example, which I'm going to suggest that probably there are kids in there who might be struggling with some of these neurodiverse challenges, which is how, why they've been unable to kind of operate in expected ways. Yeah. I think in those cases there is absolutely restraint used. Yeah. And he would sort of argue that you can restrain and that might stop that behaviour, but it's not going to stop it next time, because if they're trying to communicate something, just by you restraining them, that's not going to stop them. So he's trying to find more sustainable, ongoing, humane ways that actually help the child and the person who's the carer or the person managing them.
Yeah. So taking a step back, you put your name down for this 2-day course, and from what I can gather, he's got this CPS. Is that what he calls it?
Is that his model?
Yes,
yeah,
his model.
Yes.
Yeah. So you kind of knew what you were getting. Like you were like, okay, well, it's going to be teaching me around.
Yes.
CPS.
Typical my style. I didn't read very much about it. I knew he was coming. I knew it was 2 days, and it was split into two. So you could go to the first day, and if you chose to stay for the second day, it's more sort of in depth. Okay. So I chose both. So I did expect probably to get some tools and techniques. It was packed, and he's been all around Australia.
What's packed look like? How many people?
300.
Yeah, and it was booked out ages ago.
Booked out ages ago.
Yeah, wow.
And it was
all parents?
So he asked that. He said, hands up if you're parents. I reckon half the room. Okay. Put the hand up. Hand up if you're
educator or
educator. Not as many, but then therapists, OTs, speechies, psychologists.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what did he do for that first day? Like, how did he kick it off? How did he win you all over? Or what was it that first day when you texted us saying, this is amazing?
Yeah. I mean, I think probably most people in there would have known what they were coming for, so they knew his model. And he, how did it go? Well, I think he sort of started off with this positioning why this approach rather than behaviours themselves. And he gave lots of practical examples, which I really liked. So and he probably jumped into the model very quickly, actually. And I've got my notes. I probably should have my notes up. But I'm not here to, I'm not representing Ross Greene. I think it's important. He actually said there's lots of people out there who are saying they know about this model, but they're not certified. So disclaimer, this is just sort of what I'm starting to understand. But I think he started off with explaining that, so he said, if there's a behaviour that's of concern that you want to manage, there's plan A, plan B, and plan C. And plan A is disciplinary. Yeah. Tell them not to do it. If they do it again, there's a consequence or a punishment. So that's a power imbalance or a power play. So you're in charge, you tell the child not to do it, and then explained how that's really can be very ineffective. He doesn't talk about diagnoses very much, so he didn't say 4 autistic people, 4 children, or 4
oppositional defiance.
No, but all the things he was describing fall into all of those categories. So it's more designed for behaviours of concern. Yeah. And there were some questions from people saying, well, what if the child doesn't have behaviours of concern, but they're internalising it all and they've got all these problems? The model can still absolutely work, but I think where he began was with that cohort of kids who have behaviours of concern, because there's more attention on them. Teachers are asking for help, parents are asking for help.
And people are at their wits' end because they don't know. They need new tools, strategies. Yeah.
But it applies, and actually as I was listening, like most of the things that we learn and read is relevant to any child and any human, because it's very human-centred. Yeah. So plan A is disciplinary, and that's when the carer makes the decision and puts it on the child. Yeah. Plan C, I'll jump to that. Plan C is ignore it. Yeah. Just leave it. And sometimes we've talked about that. Yeah. When you and
pick
plan B,
pick
your battles, absolutely. And so it might be an ignore it for now. Yeah. Yeah. So that's plan C is do nothing. So either be completely in control, do nothing, and then plan B is his whole kind of concept, which is a collaborative approach to problem solving. And it absolutely has to involve the child. So I think that number one is already really interesting, and it seems so obvious. So much of what he says seems so obvious, but you think, why didn't, I hadn't really thought about that.
Engage the child in decision-making and problem solving.
Yes.
But also you have to be patient, not angry yourself,
all of
not
that.
broken, all these things.
So there's a lot of sort of scaffolding around how to do that.
And the child, well, I'll let you answer this question. Does the child need to be of a certain cognitive development or IQ or whatever to be able to engage in this? No. Okay. Talk me through it.
So let's say the concerning behaviour is hitting.
Yeah.
So what he would say is, well, let's get really specific about that. When is this happening? Oh, in the playground. But specifically when in the playground? What time is it? What's just happened? And what specifically? So my child hits in the playground after school, and who do they hit? So it's really, instead of just, he calls it clumping. So instead of saying the problem is my child hits, he wants you to break it right down into the specific times. Even if they hit in 10, 15, 18, 25
times a day or something.
Pick one.
Yeah.
So let's say my child hits me when I say no. And he'll say, well, what were they asking? Yeah. And so really kind of nubbing it down so that you can get to a very specific behaviour of concern.
Yeah.
And he calls it an unsolved problem.
Yeah.
So he's got a specific way that you phrase it.
Did he use an example? Yeah.
So Johnny has difficulty. That's the beginning of everyone.
Yeah.
Johnny has difficulty, and you don't say not doing something, but what they do. So what they're trying to do. So what's the expected behaviour? So if the expected behaviour is that we don't hit, well, maybe you say, we don't hit when we're frustrated or whatever. The expected behaviour is that you don't do that. Yeah. Johnny has difficulty controlling his anger hands or whatever.
Okay.
In the playground when playing with Fred.
Yeah. After school.
Yep. And so then what you would do is try and unpick, when are there times when Johnny might be in a playground playing and doesn't hit, or he doesn't hit Fred, and what do they look like? So you're trying to kind of chip away at the times when that behaviour can be met. So firstly, you want to work out whether they have the ability to meet that expectation.
So Johnny in the playground at recess with Freddie does not hit. Like you wouldn't say.
That would be the expected behaviour, say.
Yeah.
So before you kind of delve into the solution, you have to determine, are they able to do that?
No, that's what I mean. So if there's other circumstances where he's in the playground with Freddie and doesn't hit, what then are you looking at the factor? Okay, well, after school's the factor.
Yes, so then you know that the skill is there, the ability to meet that expectation in certain circumstances is there, but there are unsolved problems relating to that expected behaviour. So you want to work out what is going on in there. And then the way that he says it is that you ask the child. And he's got a script. It's a bit American, but it says, Johnny, I've noticed when you're in the playground playing with Freddie after school that sometimes you hit him. What's going on?
I'm just laughing because you were like, you ask the child. I'm like,
oh my God.
when they're little now I would, but I'm like, when have I asked the child?
You ask the child. Because the idea is that we as adults see everything through our own lens and we make a lot of assumptions about what we think. And
we also have our own baggage. I'm embarrassed.
All the things.
Frustrated.
All the things that get in the way, and those things inform how you respond. So he's like, let's just get the facts. And he also says, I don't want to hear because they're autistic or because they have ADHD, because that's not helpful. So I want to hear from the child, from their own mouth, about that situation.
But can all children access that?
Well, so then he's got a whole lot of strategies about how you might do that.
Yeah.
And so let's say that the child, he says there's a few different responses. Either they'll say nothing, or they'll say something and then stop, or they'll say, I don't care, I don't know. So, look, I think like any model, it sounds really good in theory, and then you can see how in practice, I can see how that could be hard, but there's so much that you can still learn from it. So let's say they say, I don't know why. And then, you don't know why. So there's all this kind of coaching around how to do empathetic listening.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is, tell me more. I'm hearing you say this, I'm hearing you say that, but you're not putting ideas in their head. You're not telling them what you think. You're just asking them. And he says there's something really powerful about asking the child, them having a sense of being heard. And being listened to, because so many times, especially kids who have a lot of those behaviours, no one's listening to them. Everyone's just telling them to stop. So there's something really powerful about that.
Yeah, nobody listens to them.
Nobody listens. And he showed a lot of videos of like live coaching sessions and live examples of teachers using the model and other therapists using the model. And it's so interesting because sometimes this information comes out that have nothing to do with their call it neurodiversity. They have to do with, sometimes they have to do with something else. Mm-hmm. And unless you ask the child and give the child, and I'm sure like practice, they probably hopefully get better at being able to do that. So there's this model of empathetic listening. Mm. And then once you've sort of got to what you think the nub of there might be more than one, right? It's not just there's one reason, but once you get to a sense of what those are, then you take this model of what if, let's say Johnny hits Freddie and there's 3 reasons why. They're tired, Freddie's mean, or something, or they wouldn't let me go on the swing, whatever. Mm. And then he does this thing. He says, well, what if you weren't tired? How do you think you'd feel? Oh, yeah, well, when I'm not tired, it's okay. Or what if Freddie was being really nice? And then what if there were 2 swings? So it's trying to get the child to be able to distinguish which thing matters more, and it helps you to be able to understand if there are multiple factors in something, which ones to them are the most important.
Yeah.
And then let's say you get to a place where you've worked out 3 or 4 things to do with that very specific situation. Then together you work out, does the expected behaviour need to be addressed? Like, do we need to revise expected behaviour? Could we change it? If we could change these things, would it be different? And so it's about when you get to so it's not a consequence. It's a plan for how do we make this better for you next time? And let's try it. And if it doesn't work, it's okay, we'll come back to it. But they've got agency in that action plan. And you have to kind of both sort of agree to it. And that can be, there's a lot of negotiation in there, and you have to, I think it's probably excruciating. But the notion of asking the child
is really powerful.
What is going on?
Can you imagine just that, like, because my brain just all of a sudden wanted to skip around. What happens if there's like 5 different behaviours, and how do you address that? And do you just focus on one? And what happens if they don't answer?
Yeah.
But one behaviour, can you imagine doing that with your 14-year-old?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can.
And talking and having that conversation, that back and forth?
Yeah.
And do you feel like she would be able to understand?
Yeah.
Or be able to reflect on what were some of the reasons? Because I know you say often there's maybe lack of insight, doesn't know why they're having a meltdown.
Yeah. So you don't ask them why.
You don't ask why.
This is another one. It's really interesting. Yeah. Like, instead of saying, if they say I hate it, you don't say, why do you hate it? So which bits of it do you hate about it? So asking them, so I've said before with my middle child that she finds it really hard to recognise and articulate and communicate complex feelings.
Yeah.
But if you're not asking about feelings, you're asking about facts.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that she could do. Now, that's not to say that there may not be a gaping hole in something that you know. So after you've gone through this information gathering process, you can say, if there are things that you could say, oh, what about this? This is what I see. Do you think that could be something? And they might say, oh, yes or no.
But and do they have to be, so when you're having this conversation, to say if your child's really heightened, you can't.
That's not when you do it.
No, so you have it after the fact. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you imagine having this conversation about being abused and yelled at when you take a screen away? So I'm thinking of the most volatile situation in your house.
Yeah, I think
one
so.
One of the most volatile.
I think, look, I don't know. I haven't practiced anything yet.
No, I know. Just, can you imagine doing it?
Yeah, I can. I think I can imagine that I would probably want to start the practice with something much more benign to get into that mode, because it's about establishing a new way of communicating, and that could take some time. Yeah. And I think also that there are other people that my daughter works with who could potentially have that conversation, right? So it doesn't have to be me. There's a great counsellor that she's working with does like animal therapy, but she's also a qualified psychologist. I could say, can we use this model? And she's much more likely to be able to talk and communicate if it's not me for some things. Yeah.
Have any of the carers, support workers, therapists in your life done this program? Do you know?
Well, so our speechy is definitely familiar with Ross Greene, so she knows about it. What I want to do is, we've got a care team meeting coming up with all the people, OT, speech, counsellor, social worker, school wellbeing person, everyone, and I want to propose that we try and use a version of this model with the goals that we're working on.
And would Ross Greene say that consistency is really important?
Yeah, I mean,
if they're like, oh, we've got our own frameworks and methodology.
Oh, look, he's pretty attached to his. You know, like, I think anyone who's very successful, they're going to be really attached to theirs, and there must be some sort of, well, you can't do that because it has to be like this. Yeah. But he is very kind of insistent that if you're going to use this model, this is how you should do it.
Yeah. And when you watch those videos, right, of people using his model, was it him or was it other people?
Both.
Okay, that's good, because I'd like to see it with it's not just him.
Both. Yeah.
Tell me what it was like, and like, you know, what the shift that you saw in the child.
Well, I think it's really easy to look at all the things that could be hard about that. How is that kid going to sit there for so long? How, you know, so I think if I try and sort of put aside all the things all the blockers that I could see about how that might not work, I think the way that you approach speaking to a child is quite different, I think. I mean, I like to think that I try and be very people-focused and try not to have hierarchy, but unless you really ask yourself, how are you talking to someone? And I know with all my children, particularly my first two, they've told me that my tone is really jarring for them. So if I'm talking about something really stressful, like let's say it's an incident of hitting or something, and I'll be like, we need to talk about this. Why are you doing that? That tone already is a really bad start. Yeah. So learning about how they experience those kind of conversations about hard things. And so I think there's something really in that. And the other one that he kind of really emphasises is that you're not talking about the behaviour. So it's not a conversation with the child about what they're doing wrong.
Yeah.
It's trying to get them to understand what's happening for them. Yeah. So I think it's very empowering for them. And the kids seem to be, I mean, it's pretty slow.
Yeah.
You can imagine, like, you're watching the videos for quite a long time and they're like, tell me more.
And the models for, like, kids with extreme behaviours and also high needs, in the sense that you would assume in an education setting, it's almost like a one-on-one.
Yeah, totally one-on-one, absolutely.
Because I look at this and I think, oh, my God, how could you do this with two other kids running around?
No, it's absolutely one-on-one, yeah. I think like anything, it's a practice.
Yeah.
But you know what happened? So yesterday, it was day 2, and he was giving some examples of different age kids and different sort of scenarios, and one of them he raised was, like a teacher might be complaining about a kid constantly leaving the classroom. And literally, I get an email from the science teacher of my year 10 saying, your boy is leaving the classroom constantly during the class and he needs to stop. Yeah. It was emailed to him, to me, and to the head of house of that. And I responded saying, thanks for your note. This is not a new thing. I would like to position that my child wants to do well at school. Mm. And if he could stay in the classroom, he would. So can we try and unpack why he's not staying in the classroom?
Yeah. Or what's going on for him?
What is making it hard for him to stay? Not let's focus on the fact that he keeps going. And I wrote this long note literally while I was in there saying, can we please start from a place of non-judgment and non-criticism, and let's understand what's going on. But can we be specific? What were you teaching in that class? What time was it?
What was expected? What behaviours expected of him?
Right.
Like, was everyone having to sit still and concentrate, and he was just feeling hemmed in?
And can we please ask him? And can we please keep on asking him until he's exhausted all the possible reasons? And then can we, so I wrote this.
Did you hashtag Ross Greene?
I mean, I should have credit copyright something, but it was just amazing. She said, I'll talk to you next term. Oh. It was the end of term.
Look at you, 2:58 on
I know, Friday, yeah. But she sent the note the same day, right? Yeah. But that particular thing has been happening a lot.
Yeah.
And there has been quite a lot of complaints about it. And I'm like, well, has anyone tried to... And actually, I gave an example. I said, we had a similar issue in maths. The teacher asked him, and he said, it's really crowded in here and loud, and we know he's behind because of all the COVID stuff. So I said, so you guys agreed that he could have headphones in the classroom? Tick, great. And we've got a tutor to help try and catch him up. Tick. So there may be other things going on, but unless we try and unpack what are those things, all that's going to happen is the kid's going to be in trouble again. And it's not actually helping them. So next time they go into science, they're not going to stay longer because they got in trouble last time. It's just going to be everyone's going to continue to get annoyed, and then no one's even asked the question why.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you use that in...
I loved it too.
Yeah. So what else? What were some other big takeaways from this? That's massive, that framework.
So the model is based on these 2 ideas of lagging skills and unsolved problems. And lagging skills, they're not perhaps the more traditional ones of, they're behind in maths or they can't do division, but the lagging skills fit under the category of their ability to be flexible and adaptable, their ability to self-regulate, their ability to, I've forgotten them, but they're all around that either executive functioning or self-regulation or communicate. So those more probably bucketed up neurodiverse challenges that we might be currently addressing through speech and OT, but so it's this concept of what is the lagging skill that's holding them back from meeting that expectation, and then what is the unsolved problem, which is more about the environment, what is happening in the environment. So they may or may not, if they have a lagging skill, you have to take that into account. So if the lagging skill is, for argument's sake, self-regulation, then it's not fair to expect them to meet a certain expectation if they actually can't.
Yeah.
So the first thing you've got to work out is, can they or can't they?
Yeah.
And if they can't, adjust the expectation. If they can, but only in certain circumstances, let's work out under which circumstances they can't, and let's try and find out why.
Yeah.
So I think, and then he's got this full kind of assessment tool to work those things out. So what I started to do was write listing the unsolved problems the biggest ones, and there's a lot, right? So from like not brushing their teeth or not washing their hair or not getting in the shower, not picking up their mess, using nasty words when they don't get their way, lots of them.
Yeah.
And then so I started to write them all down, and then what I want to do is look at them in the context of, do they have the skills to do this thing or not? So brushing teeth, for example, he gave a good example of that you might be able to brush your teeth, but what is going on why you don't want to do it? And it might be the taste of the toothpaste. It might be the sound of the electric toothbrush. It might be the water gets on your face. And so they can physically do it, but there's things getting in the way that make them not do it.
Yeah.
So then you can come up with a lot. So I think what can happen is you think, I know so many. Am I supposed to do that full-on process for all of them?
I feel overwhelmed just thinking about that list.
Right. So he said then once you've got that, you prioritise them.
Yeah, okay.
What are the most important ones? And you would use a lens of safety.
Yeah. Right?
As a starting point. So and in our case, we have some of those things. So I would be less focused on toothbrushing and more focused on safety.
Yeah.
You can prioritise. You know what the biggest things are.
Yeah.
So you just start with
and teachers will have a different list. Like
they might have one too.
Your 14-year-old goes to school and they're like, right, we need to prioritise, I don't know, swearing or whatever.
The most pressing things and the things that are going to have the most impact.
Yeah.
And then I think there is an element of also examining the expected behaviour and asking yourself, why is this an expected behaviour? And some of them don't matter as much. So
it's hard when you think about that in a school setting. And of course, I think if the kids have these type of behaviours, the school setting is going to be alternative. It's probably, maybe it's mainstream school.
Hopefully, yeah. I
mean, maybe it's mainstream school and then you've got 25 kids and it's a nightmare for a teacher, really.
Yeah.
But is then, okay, when you look at them because it's very easy to go, well, that has an impact on the other kids.
Yeah.
That has an impact on my teaching.
Yes.
It's like, and that's when you all of a sudden, that kid just get out.
Yeah.
You're suspended or go to the principal because you don't have the capacity and the time to work through this.
Yes.
But then when that kid is sent to the principal or sent to wellbeing or whatever, that's the opportunity to use this model.
Well, he talks about how he says, there are perennial kids who will get sent out and they're perennial centre-outerers.
Yeah, yes.
So there are some teachers who are more inclined to do that. Yeah. So there's an element of looking at both sides of it. Yeah. So, in his perfect world, all the teachers are trained as well.
Yeah, and you don't send kids out, of course. I was more thinking...
No, but it's true because it's really real and it does happen. But it's a state of perpetual problem because you send them out, but the next day they come in. The fact that you sent them out doesn't address whatever the problem was.
No, it doesn't at all.
So there was one
example...
example...
do you spend half an hour... I'm being devil's advocate. Do you spend half an hour with this kid going through that model and the other kids are just sitting there?
I mean, you can't. So that's when the school counsellor has to do it. Or, I think practically for sure, like anything, if you want to bring in a new culture, it has to be everywhere. It can't just be, I'm just going to try this model and still trying to do everything else.
Yeah. And from what I can gather, he is about not when you're left with no other option, but his is like what would be traditionally called difficult kids.
Yeah, he calls them concerning behaviours.
Yeah, concerning behaviours.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that's where it starts because those are the ones who get, in the US and depending on how bad the behaviours are, they can get restrained. They can get, they can be in danger.
Yeah.
So I think it does come initially from that concept of there are these kids who need help and the way that we're dealing with them at the moment is actually bad for everyone.
Yeah. I think for a lot of probably teachers and therapists hearing him talk like that and thinking when they've used all of the tools and frameworks and models and nothing's worked, this could be kind of groundbreaking.
I mean, really. Look, you like to think so. I think for me what's most remarkable about it is that what we said at the start, like this very simple concept. Because if you think about OTs and speechies and psychologists probably do it a little bit, but they're coming with this predetermined model that they're pushing onto the child.
Yeah.
But it's not informed by what the child's told you about them and about their situation. So it's almost, if you just add in to the speech approach or to the OT approach, that questioning, that research at the beginning about, because otherwise you can be pushing a model that actually, I mean, I think I've noticed that particularly with one of my kids, that the more we understand about how she processes the world, the more we can see where some of those things just aren't going to work. So the example that came up a lot, which there was a lot of noise in the room, is this, the red light, green light, yellow zone thing.
Oh my God, yeah, that's very controversial.
He's like, and because I've always had an issue with that idea that, we all work with this model and, once the children understand which zone they're in, then they're going to go off and make a good decision. Most humans, once they're in the yellow or red zone, are not using their functioning brain to do anything. So what he says, this is the other really kind of important point that he talks about, is he says be early. So once they're in yellow or red, it's too late. So be early. And his idea is you want to be preemptive rather than reactive. So the more that you can set for the child knowing what they need rather than waiting for things to go badly, which seems like really sensible. I remember, I think it was our paediatrician once said to us, or our psychologist, it's not about exposure therapy. So if your child, say, is really anxious in crowd, it's not keep putting them in a crowd until they feel better. Avoid the crowd.
Yeah.
So that sort of preemptive idea of the more you understand about their needs.
PTSD and OCD, the exposure therapy is
right.
Supposed to be what
totally.
works. We're just talking about this.
Yes, absolutely. And so that understanding of what are those, and then it's all the stuff that we know. What are the sensory sensitivities? What are the scenarios that are particularly triggering? Let's start with those, and and then so some of it you just take it away, and that's probably what option C is. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
So if the expectation is that you take the bus to school, and you work out that there's so many problems with that, don't do it. Find another way. So it's very practical. And the other thing that I really liked that was notable to me was, he said, when you're asking the child about what's going on, don't ask them why.
Yeah, you said that before.
Yeah, don't ask them
that's
why.
That's what's stuck in my head. It's really in my head right now.
It's big. So big. If they, you might get hi, Johnny, I noticed you're not getting your homework done. Tell me about it. And they say, I don't know, or it's boring.
I hate it.
It's boring. So you don't say, why do you think it's boring? Oh, it's boring. Which bits are boring? It's different. Because you're asking them to be specific, not about giving an opinion.
Actually, I've got a really good example of this that's made a massive shift in our household because our therapist, my youngest child psychologist, did this, but not knowing it was Ross Greene, but I'm sure they've got their own models. But they were like, what are some things that, we want to talk about this week? How are the morning routines going? And we're like, oh, they're terrible now. They're back to being, terrible. And I'm like, I'm just, kind of sick of just don't do anything in the morning. I didn't say it like that, but, in my head I'm like, it's just we're not really doing anything, getting ready. And then she was like, what is it that you're finding difficult? Asked my child. And they were like, it's just, getting up, getting out of bed and getting ready. What is it about getting ready?
Which bit of getting ready?
Ready? What is it about? And then I don't know what to wear. I can't choose.
See? They're the nuggets of gold that if you didn't drill down, you wouldn't, and that is actually easy enough to address.
Yeah. So now I just go, because I feel like it was going backwards to do this to an 11-year-old that I used to do when they were 5. But I'm like, these are your clothes, here are your tracksuit, here is your top, because we don't have uniforms, right? Yeah. Here you go in the morning. Yeah. And then they're like, I've checked the temperature, it's 21 or it's 17. Oh, thank you.
See? That's
so it was like the idea,
example.
The effort of like knowing what the temperature is, am I wearing the right thing, is it going to fit me, is it clean? Perfect. All those things for an ADHD or a child was perfect. It was amazing. It's been life-changing. And also I let go of going, my 11-year-old should be able to pick their own clothes. I'm like, I don't care.
Why? So that's a great example.
Yeah.
And that's where I think you might not have got to that. And that's where our assumptions, right? But also without sort of, because we clump, that's a clumping, right? So the concerning behaviour might be that Johnny can't get themselves dressed in the morning.
Yeah. Well, it was the concerning behaviour as well was like in my mind, we're late to school.
But that's so clumped up.
Yeah, it's clumped. That's what I mean. So
so you break it right down.
And then it's Johnny can't get dressed. Right. So you've broken that one down.
Yeah. And you kind of, the mind boggles a little bit if you think about. But I think what the point is if we can get some of those things sorted, the other ones might not be as bad, or then we can start to address them. But I think it's a bit hopeful.
Yeah.
A bit hopeful.
Yeah.
Because actually all it is information gathering.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're trying to change anything. You're just trying to find out why or more.
Well, it's more than hopeful, because it's also that then you've got a child who is having their voice heard.
Exactly.
So even if it doesn't work, like that part doesn't work.
Right.
But that child is going, someone asked me what it was about the playground or the getting up in the morning that was difficult.
Right.
Or little Johnny or Freddie or whatever.
And maybe that skill to start to notice. Because if you know that someone might ask you, you might start in time with maturity to notice, to pay attention. So that when mum asks you, good for anyone.
Good for a relationship.
Good for anyone.
What is it about what happened when I walked through that door? Why you were so aggro at me or whatever.
Yes. So in that sense, it is absolutely universal.
Yeah.
And it's just problem solving.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Oh my gosh, there's so much.
There's so much. But that was just those 2 light bulb moments for me. The actually asking your child and not saying why.
Yeah. So the other one, just another sort of helpful one, is not what were you feeling, but what were you thinking?
Okay, because the feelings are scary.
Well, I don't know. Maybe because some kids are limited with how many feelings they're able to distinguish.
Yeah.
Maybe sad, happy, angry, whatever. Yeah. But if you're thinking, because thinking tells you more as well. I was thinking that I might get in trouble about that. So if they just said I was scared, you don't get enough information about what they were scared of. But if they were thinking I might get in trouble about that, that's information that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think and this is just the takeaways off the top of my head, is about ask the kid.
Yeah.
And find different ways to do that. He's got some good strategies for how to do that. Remove your own assumptions.
Yeah.
Really big one. Because I do this all the time. I know why. It's just annoying. Well, do I? So removing your assumptions, giving the voice to the child, and some of those things about thinking versus
don't ask
feeling,
what you're feeling, what
you're
thinking. Love it.
So
and he's
much.
Got lots of free resources on his website.
So he's got livesinthebalance.org is his website. There's heaps about the different things that they're doing, and through my course I got lots of material so I can talk you through more.
Thank you for sharing, Anna.
Such
That
a
was
pleasure.
great.
So
Thank
good.
you. Bye.
Pleasure. Bye.